if you're choosing between things or you're kind of trying to figure out where do I focus, I generally think larger banks will open more doors and leave more optionality on the table for you, whether it's a bulge bracket or a middle market or a boutique bank. When it comes to figuring out the group, I would say there are kind of like three factors. And in order of importance, those three factors, in my opinion, are the people that you're around, the deals and companies that you get to work with, and like way down below is your interest in that industry.
Welcome to the Breaking Into Finance podcast. Let's dive in. Hey everybody, after last week doing the solo episode where I was just up here talking, got some great feedback on that. And I think the upshot is I'm probably going to do more of those, just kind of like giving my take on the market type of stuff. I'm going to try to weave those in a little bit more frequently. But in the meantime, I'm really excited to share this episode that I recorded with Jessica. She is a former investment banker, private equity investor, now entrepreneur, and she runs a really, really cool program called Access Distributed. But really great interview. Hope you guys enjoy. Hey, everybody. I am thrilled to have Jessica Holton joining me today. Jessica is someone who is introduced to by a mutual friend. And Jessica, thanks so much for coming on. I think we have a lot in common.
Yay. Thank you so much for having me, Craig. It means a lot to be here and to get to talk with you today.
Of course. And maybe just because, you and I have both had similar tacks, which is starting our careers in banking and private equity, going to business school, and then pursuing the entrepreneurial route. So maybe I'd love if you could just give a quick background on yourself. And then I want to dig into some of the various elements of your journey, as well as what you're doing, today.
Amazing. Well, without giving you too much detail, I'll start from when I was a kid. I grew up knowing that one day I wanted to start a business. And what mattered most to me and still matters to me is building something that is important to people's lives and building that so that I can have so much more impact than I could ever have as myself, as an individual. That being said, I always gravitated towards business, but had no idea as a high schooler or college student what business actually really meant. And I definitely was very far away from having any ideas on what I wanted to start. And so I went to Georgetown University for undergrad, and I majored in finance and accounting. Really, accounting primarily I loved it. And I saw all of the most ambitious, most hardworking kids around me go to various careers, but in particular investment banking. So I followed in their footsteps and did investment banking for my first 2 years out of college in New York, and then invested in private equity for about 2 years in consumer retail at Carlyle. And then went to business school, and then finally dove into entrepreneurship. And so since graduating from school, I started a nonprofit called Access Distributed with a really good friend of mine. And then I also started a company called Ours, and we do nothing related to finance besides for couples finances. We do modern relationship health and couples therapy.
Lot of stuff to dig into, but let's start with Access Distributed. And yeah. I'm curious why you decided to start that initiative. Obviously, I feel very like-minded doing Breaking Into Finance, but would love to hear what the prompt or impetus was for you.
Yeah, so I started my career at Morgan Stanley in the financial sponsors group in investment banking. And I sat right behind this guy named Manny, and we literally were feet away from each other for 2.5 years, our internship and then full time. And so we became very, very close friends and kind of each other's bouncing off sounding boards and, helping each other out throughout the years. We ended up going to Stanford together and did our MBA at the same time. And there was this one moment where we were reflecting. He had started a tech company, I was starting a skincare company, and we were reflecting after graduating from the GSB. We were basically saying, like, had we not started our careers in investment banking, like my family growing up had nothing to do with finance, and same for him. And we got very, very, very lucky that we had mentors and we just kind of fell into an opportunity to interview. And we were reflecting on, how do we not started our careers in finance? Our lives would be so tremendously different today. And we really just had this moment of being so grateful for everything that the finance industry afforded us and all the doors it opened, all the financial independence it gave us. And for me in particular, I think the confidence, the skill set to be in this world of finance, especially when there are not that many women, as we all know, in the finance world. Um, and we had this moment of realizing, we spend every week or so, we're talking to people who want to get into finance and we're helping them out. We're telling them what we did, lessons we learned, advice, um, and try to play just a tiny role in helping them break into finance. And we both were like, wait, what if we created an organization that did that in a much more effective way than we could just do as individuals? And so we started Access Distributed before the pandemic. And our dream was to create an organization that when a fellow, which is typically a sophomore student in undergrad all across the country, when a fellow joins Access Distributed, we envisioned recruiters, investment banks, asset managers, private equity firms, everyone in the finance world to see Access Distributed on their resume and equate that to getting a resume from someone who goes to Harvard or Wharton. And we wanted it to be an educational training ground that makes the fellows that are part of AD, Access Distributed, so well trained and equipped to hit the ground running when they get into their internship and then beyond. But also create this community and flywheel effect that we all know target schools have going for them. Where when I graduated from Georgetown, I went into a group that had a lot of Georgetown students or alumni in it, and we wanted to create that same kind of network and community feeling with Access Distributed. So we started it right before the pandemic. We just had our fifth boot camp. We've grown quite a bit. We've onboarded a ton of great partners. And it's really something that I'm so proud of because it really does open doors for students who come from underrepresented backgrounds, non-target schools all across the country, and kind of level that playing field, so to speak, to breaking into finance.
And what does the structure of this boot camp look like? So you said fifth, so I assume it's annually, maybe during January or.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah, you nailed it.
all right, and for folks
Well,
who are listening to this, how do they get involved? Like, how would they
yeah,
apply? I guess for next year.
yeah. So right now we take fellows. So the fellowship is a year-long program, and so we take right now sophomores in college to be a fellow, and then the boot camp is open to all fellows, and in fact, is actually a requirement as being part of the fellowship. So if any freshmen are listening right now, our application for next year's fellowship will open later this spring. And so go through that application process. You can check us out at accessdistributed.org, get on our mailing list, join a few information sessions, and then the fellowship is what, and we pay for all fellows to come. This year it was in New York, it's been in Chicago, DC, and it's a really, really phenomenal weekend. But it's just one part of the overall fellowship. And I will say, because I know you have a lot of listeners who are not necessarily freshmen in college right now, or earlier, and we also offer several free events, events such as Design Your Career. We also have newsletters that are super valuable, no matter how old you are, no matter what stage you're in, and where you're coming from, that if you get on our mailing list, you'll hear more about, and gives you a flavor of the doors that we are aiming to open.
Amazing, amazing. And whether it's through the fellowship, through the boot camp, what are some of the biggest challenges, or maybe like what's one challenge that you see as kind of a common link that a lot of fellows face?
I'll say three challenges. I know you asked for one, but as
Even
we all
better,
know, it's
even
an
better.
extraordinarily hard journey. Um, so the first challenge is there's just a lot of information. So when you get into finance, I am sure that it's well known that you have to go through an interview process. That interview process is very intense because there's so many people applying for these jobs in banking and private equity and hedge funds and all of the finance roles. And in order to do well in those interviews, you have to know basically you have to know what you're expected to know on day one of graduating from college. But so there's a lot of technical skills. So we teach our fellows accounting, finance, valuation, modeling, Excel, PowerPoint, how to invest, what credit is. And so I think one of the biggest challenges is just like the sheer volume of information to know before you even decide if banking is right for you or even give yourself a chance to get into those interviews. So it's quite an investment of just knowledge and learning to know. And of course, I think no matter what, even if you don't even go into the finance world, and we actually say this at AD, we don't view success as placing you necessarily in finance if that's not where you want to go. We view success as helping you figure out where you want to go and then helping you get there. Um, I think it's valuable no matter where you end up to know accounting at the very least and lots of fundamentals about investing and the business world. So that's one challenge is just how much to know. The second challenge is networking and connections to the finance world. I got my interview and then I think my super day and then into Morgan Stanley as a result of several Georgetown alumni who really went to bat for me and are still mentors to me today. Um, and they helped pull me up just because I was a Georgetown student and a fellow Hoya with them. And so that really shaped my entire career. And so sophomores who are coming from one, I was a junior when I was going through that. I was a little bit further in my college career. Now it's so much earlier. Um, as a sophomore, especially at schools that don't have that much of a presence on Wall Street in the same kind of way, there just aren't as many people to contact and get to know and build relationships with and have that same bringing you in just because you went to the same school. And so what we help fellows do is through Access Distributed mentorship and our partners and the community around Access Distributed, we help our fellows really build those relationships with people in finance, not necessarily from the same school that they go to, but tapping into other communities and the AD community. And in general, just like getting to know people, meeting people in finance and building relationships with them. The third challenge is one that is so near and dear to my heart in just all aspects of what I've built or aim to build is just a feeling of belongingness in this space. I remember going through investment banking interviews. It was winter and it was so cold. And I had to go from my place on campus to the interview rooms. And I just remember feeling so lonely in this and so like, what am I doing? Like, there are all these smart kids around me. They know what they're doing. They know how to model. They've done internships before. I've done none of that. Like, I don't belong here. And that challenge of being able to envision yourself as someone who deserves or could flourish in that seat on Wall Street that just feels so far away and so not part of what I ever like expected me to be a part of. That feeling of belongingness, I think, is a real challenge, and admittedly one that I still face, whether in the finance world or in startup world or just general career stuff. And so I think like, becoming comfortable with figuring out like you do belong here but really, really innately believing that is one of the, I think, hardest to overcome, but most meaningful to explore and kind of get familiar with challenge.
It's so amazing to me how, you know, nobody, I don't care where you went to undergrad, nobody knows more than like 20% of what first year analysts know. And the information asymmetry is
Oh,
so
true.
massive. And that leads to
Yeah.
some really interesting things, right? Like there's no level of prep that any undergrad can do that can position you to out of the box be like a great analyst. And so as a result, in some ways,
Yeah.
literally nobody belongs. And so that's like one kind of
Yeah,
like
it's
mental
true.
hurdle that's like nobody and everybody, right? Is the flip side of that coin is like, well, they're hiring people, and so why not you? And so there's
Yeah.
definitely this mental challenge of there are heuristics that are often true that help tell you you're at this level. And when you're applying to these jobs, if your bar is what first year analysts know, if your bar is acing any interview question, it's an impossible bar. Like nobody achieves that bar.
Yeah.
Um, and so
Yeah.
there are definitely minimum levels of like technicals prep and jargon understanding, but just this like perception of this impossible barrier is both true and, because it's true, a complete myth.
Yeah.
It's this like weird juxtaposition that I still have a tough time articulating to people in a way that doesn't sound so depressing.
Well, I mean, it's fascinating because then once you're on the job, you are really valued for how quickly you learn and how
Mm-hmm.
resourceful you are in figuring it out. And at least in my experience, I mean, yes, my analysts when I was an intern and my associates when I was an analyst and all the higher ups, of course, expected me to know, how the statements worked and how to model, but really they had pretty low expectations coming
Yeah.
in. They were like, we know you've never done this before, so of course you're going to learn, and what you're motivated by and expected to do is figure out how to learn all of that stuff and figure out how to apply it. There's also literally no way in the world that you could know everything you need to know until you get to do it. And I think that's true literally
Yeah.
any career.
And especially, me as the lowly liberal arts college student competing against accounting majors like you, it's like it's even worse.
I
But that
know,
the rate
but
of change point, the
yeah.
learning curve, I harped on that
Yes.
often.
It's so, so true.
Yeah.
One of my closest friends to this day was another woman who sat next to me, and she went to a liberal arts school, but she had this like just intuitive understanding of just business and companies. And to this day, she is an investor right now, and I am very much not an investor. But she and I always had this kind of like complementary, like she always jokes that that I taught her accounting. I always joke that she taught me everything else. And like, I share that because she, I think like we both felt like we didn't belong, but for very different reasons. Um, and I think that's just like true, whether you're an accounting major or you like, I don't know, we all kind of have our strengths coming into it and then learn a lot of what we need to learn for the other stuff.
For your cohorts of AD fellows,
Mhm.
one of the questions that they face is which, you know, is banking right for me? But then within banking, is FIG right for me? Is
Mm.
like all of the other groups, or NR or financing versus classic, bulge bracket versus boutique. And maybe this is a little bit of like a, Middlebury, like non-target ethos, but I sort of felt like I would answer questions like which one is right for me based on like, well, which one would like to have me? um, and and where do I know people? And like I'll gladly say that wherever you work is where I want to work. Um, I'm curious if you have any frameworks that you give to AD fellows about how to really understand which one is best for them.
Yes, a few. Number one, especially early in your career, I always suggest opening as many doors as possible. So let me take a step back. I was always of the mindset of I know I one day want to start a company. Maybe I want to stay in finance forever, but maybe not. I'm not sure where I want to end up in 10 years when I'm really honest about it. So coming from that point of view, I always taken the approach early on as early in your career, open as many doors as you possibly can because you just don't know which one you're going to want to go down until you go down a few of them. If, however, you are like some of my friends and just knew you wanted to end up in investing, you wanted to open your own investment firm, and that was your career for until you retire, then of course I think that changes the calculus a little bit, where then you want to kind of be optimizing the choices to get to that end point if that's where you know you want to head. Um, but let's kind of talk about, I think the majority of us don't know exactly where we want to be. So I always say maximize your doors. And I think that the ways that you do that are and I'm speaking just generally and on average. Um, I think the bigger the bank often comes with more doors being opened. And I also think going to banking opens a wider set of doors than going right into private equity, as an example. So if you think about that kind of framework, like if you're choosing between things or you're kind of trying to figure out where do I focus, I generally think larger banks will open more doors and leave, more optionality on the table for you. Um, let's say you go into whether it's a bulge bracket or a middle market or a boutique bank. When it comes to figuring out the group, I would say there are kind of like three factors. And in order of importance, those three factors, in my opinion, are the people that you're around, the deals and companies that you get to work with, and like way down below is your interest in that industry. And so the people is just far and away the most important thing, not only because they will dictate uh, how your day to day feels. Like I loved my group at Morgan Stanley, financial sponsors group. I will sing from the rooftops. If I ever went back into banking, I would beg them to take me back. I loved them so much. Um, they they dictate how your day to day feels, and that just matters a lot. Like we kind of had the mentality of you can do anything for 2 years, but like 2 years is a really long time of your life. So how you feel day to day really matters, and the people around you are the difference between it feeling good and great and fulfilling and supportive to it feeling like I had friends who had horrible experiences, and it's because of the people that they were surrounded by. So that is the biggest thing. So you've opened all the doors you possibly can. Then you really prioritize for who are the people around you and will they go to bat for you? And are they people that you admire, respect, want to follow the footsteps in? The second thing is what kind of deals are you going to be doing? And I don't really mean like, are you going to be doing IPOs? Are you going to be doing LBOs? But will you get access to the kind of C-suite type people? Will you be doing active deals? Will you be doing a large variety of types of deals? That's what I loved about the sponsors group is we did IPOs and LBOs and refinancings and general kind of business development. So again, you kind of want to optimize for something that has deals that overlap with what you want to learn. And I think like one question that I often asked was I was very much more quantitative leaning and loved and still love being in Excel way more than I loved being in PowerPoint or Word. And so I would often ask kind of like, what is the split between Excel that you were in and PowerPoint? And they're just different groups have different splits. And I kind of tried to gravitate towards the ones that were more quantitative.
Man, what a telling question. What a telling
Yeah,
question.
yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And then lastly is the industry. And I just mentioned this actually as being something you really don't want to optimize for, in my opinion. Like I think it's really easy for you to say, oh, I love, and I would have said, I love consumer retail industry, businesses. Like I do. I ended up investing in consumer retail. Uh, but so early on in your career, like it's just so much less important. Like it doesn't matter if you're working on the coolest deal in the world if you don't like the people you're working with and you're spending more time in PowerPoint than Excel if that's not where you want to be. So I mentioned that as something to actually probably like really, really deprioritize in
Yep.
terms of where you're
And
going.
this is a question that people ask a lot, which is, if I'm going into Fig, am I locked into that as
Yeah,
my industry vertical forever? Um,
yeah. And
and
the answer is definitely not.
yeah, and even in the Carlyles of the world too, it's probably worth like double. It's not like you had to find some like random fund that would like take
Yeah,
you doing an
yeah.
industry switch. It was like,
Oh,
no
yeah.
problem.
Yeah,
Um,
especially so early on. Like I kind of think of like when we're so early in our careers, you're like stem cells. Like you could be anything, and really, it's just about learning and working really hard and being curious. And every industry benefits from that.
and that's part of why I loved the like Excel versus PowerPoint question, because
Mm,
that I think that framing is harder for someone to give a roundabout answer to. And I
sure.
think that at this age, and that first 1, 0, 1, 2, 3 years out of school, those Excel skills are the most marketable skill that you will get
Yeah,
in banking. And so there is like, you know there are a lot of jobs where you'll learn a lot, you'll get a lot of opportunities, but I think the sliding scale isn't just like personal preference all the time. Like you definitely want to lean into the Excel focused
yeah,
opportunities if you have that option.
yeah. It's also like the hardest to hone, and you only get good at it by spending time in it. Like there's just really no other real way to get good at it. So building up that skill set will last you for your entire life, no matter where you go.
I want to ask one last question, which is perhaps the one on the minds of most of our listeners, which is, you've mentioned a few times always wanting to start your own business, and that was something that was in your head from an early age. How did you find the right time to go take that leap?
It was definitely a big driving. So it was a big driving factor of why I went to business school, and it was really after business school. In short, at Carlyle, I found myself I was there for 2 years, and I loved my group there. I really loved all the businesses that we got to meet with, and my portfolio company. But I found myself in every meeting with a management team, I found myself like literally feeling jealous and envious of the management teams that sat across from us because they got to do this cool job. Like they got to make the marketing decisions and build new products and talk to customers and actually change customers' lives. And I just felt this like pull like more and more over the time period um, towards them, and I just wanting to be in their seats. I also found very quickly, as we were going through investment committees and investment decisions, that I think anything can work out. Like, I truly believe that any business can turn around and be a good investment. And that makes me a horrible investor because that is just not good discernment. But I think I think it sets me up well to be an entrepreneur in the startup world. And so it just ended up not really fitting. And like I learned so much in those 2 years and would never give them back or do them differently. But it just got to the point where I was like, okay, when I think about what comes next and what makes me tick and get up out of bed, it's becoming time to make that reality. I still wasn't ready by the time I finished in private equity. And so I decided to go to business school and really spend those 2 years. I focused exclusively on entrepreneurship and just becoming more and more okay with the unfamiliar and uncertainty and the risk taking of startups. And then by the time I graduated from business school and just kind of being around that for 2 years um, really helped me dive right in and haven't looked back since.
And for that decision, I guess, did you pair going to business school with, I want to be an entrepreneur and business school is the place to incubate this, versus like,
Yes.
had you not, like, in a world where you don't get into GSB,
Yeah.
is that like you're like, okay, well, I'll stay at Carlyle or I'll go recruit somewhere else? Or would you have like done the entrepreneurship route without business school?
I definitely would not have done the entrepreneurship route. I didn't have the confidence I didn't realize or know that you could just start something. And I needed the 2 years of like kind of building that up for me. What I would have done was go to a kind of startup company,
Yeah.
like a startup, and probably like I probably would have found myself getting in through finance or through, kind of like business development or anything analytical. And then probably surround myself that way. And that would have been the equivalent of like kind of my business school. And then I think I probably would have felt ready to start something after that.
It's amazing how much of a bigger world it is than you think it is when you're, doing those like banking PE years. I just
It's so
remember
true.
just being amazed at all of the things that people do.
Yeah.
I honestly, I felt very similarly. I was eager and excited and I wanted to start a company, but I felt like business school was the great, it elevates the floor and gives me a chance to like, shoot for the stars and like, give myself like a high volatility, opportunity with my call option for, well, if this doesn't
Yes.
work out, I have my degree.
It's a great way of putting it. It's also
Well,
just 2 years of like personal growth and development. And I have the best friends from business school that I love so much and can't imagine not knowing. So,
yeah,
there's that element of it too.
absolutely. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for sharing your expertise. And then we'll plug one last time for folks. So Access Distributed, if you are interested in being a fellow, it's a full year obligation. Like what's like the time commitment people can expect?
It's pretty intense in the fall. We equate it to another class. Like if you're doing 5 classes as your semester, this is a 6th class in the
Great.
fall. And then it kind of tapers down in the spring a little bit.
Which is a lot of work, but also a very valuable resume bullet.
Yes.
And a lot of learning.
Definitely. And it's really fun too.
Yes. All right. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for hopping on. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. This was so fun.
That does it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. And remember to check out our website, breakingintofinancepodcast.com, where you can submit questions, join our Substack to stay up to date on new content releases, and much, much more. We'll see you next time.